Welcome back to the Morning Kickoff Show. I'm your host, Matt Witt, and we are back to talk Minnesota Vikings football. After the Vikings are finally back in the winning column, coming up with a 40-3 disgusting performance to the Dallas Cowboys, where the Vikings got obliterated against the NFC opponents. The Minnesota Vikings stay at home, stay in Minnesota to take care of the New England Patriots on a primetime victory. One of the staple wins for the Minnesota Vikings after finally we have won on a primetime game this season. Minnesota Vikings 33-26 win over the New England Patriots. First time the Vikings have beat the Patriots since the year 2000, where Kirk Cousins has yet again led his team to another fourth quarter comeback. This is the sixth fourth quarter comeback of the season for Kirk Cousins, and I cannot wrap my head around on the fact that Kirk Cousins can be such a mediocre quarterback throughout the first three quarters and all of a sudden turns into primetime Tom Brady. I mean, Kirk Cousins is to thank for this Minnesota Vikings victory. He was dropping dimes all over this Patriots secondary in the fourth quarter. It's so interesting to see how a quarterback can have such a weird roller coaster of emotions for this Minnesota Vikings fan base throughout the entire season and the entire four quarters. Four fourth quarter comebacks in just 10 games, I believe it has been for the Minnesota Vikings. 11 games now. Yes, 11 games for the Minnesota Vikings. Not only this, but Justin Jefferson yet again proves why he's the best receiver in the league. I mean, the Patriots had all hands on deck to stop Justin Jefferson, and they couldn't even contain him. And let's not forget, might be the best wide receiver in the league. He is also our quarterback too. Justin Jefferson again throws for another first down for the Minnesota Vikings on an 11-yard pass on the first drive of the game. Now Justin Jefferson has a higher passer rating than Kirk Cousins, and don't be surprised if Justin Jefferson also gets paid close to Kirk Cousins, as Justin Jefferson now, at this point, Kwesi is just going to hand Jefferson a blank check and say, write how much money you want to get paid, because whatever number Justin Jefferson wants to get paid is worth it. After this, 23-year-old receiver yet again has another huge day, breaks the record for most receiving yards throughout the first three seasons by a wide receiver. We knew it was going to happen. Did we know it was going to happen this early in the season? Maybe not, but Justin Jefferson is Hall of Fame bound here, and I don't want to hear anybody compare him to Randy Moss because they are two completely different receivers, but Justin Jefferson is making his own path for this Minnesota Vikings team. The best receiver I have seen play in purple and gold in a long time, Justin freaking Jefferson, is back with a 139-day against the New England Patriots. Not only him, but this entire Vikings passing offense was great. I talked going into this game how the Minnesota Vikings had to run a different offense. Last week against the Dallas Cowboys was horrible. And going into this game, the Minnesota Vikings had a different game plan. They knew last week did not work whatsoever. Against the Dallas Cowboys, like I mentioned, that was a humbling loss and a loss that the Vikings are going to have to learn from. Kirk Cousins had no time inside the pocket, and this is due to a variety of different reasons. But the number one reason is the fact that they had no game plan for Micah Parsons. They had no game plan for DeMarcus Lawrence in that game. Kirk Cousins had no time inside the pocket. They were relying too much on their offensive line. And now going into this game where you're going up against a pass rushing team that is, you could argue, is better than the Cowboys. I mean, the Patriots have Matt Judon. The Patriots have multiple players who can get to the quarterback all game long. Well, the Vikings were able to contain them as the Minnesota Vikings went into this game with an entire new starting offense. The Minnesota Vikings started CJ Ham out there, our boy, Hammer Time. Started two tight ends on the field at one time. It looked similar to a Mike Zimmer offense, except the fact that Kirk Cousins was actually being a risky passer this year. Looking at it for the Minnesota Vikings, I talked about this in the preview, and I talked about this recapping the Dallas Cowboys game, that we have to find a balance between our super risky offense and a super conservative offense. Because looking at it for the Minnesota Vikings, last 2 years was awful for the Vikings. They were a very, very conservative offense, and that's what led the Vikings to a lot of fourth quarter losses. Now, the Vikings being a very risky offense led us to a lot of fourth quarter comebacks. I would much rather take a risky offense than a conservative offense, but you have to find a balance between the two. And I feel like in this game, the Minnesota Vikings found the sweet spot, as the Minnesota Vikings are running a lot less 11 personnel in this game, as KJ Osborne saw a season low 57 snaps in this game. Now, 57 snaps doesn't sound like a very low amount, but he's a wide receiver 3, and in a Minnesota Vikings offense, he usually sees 70+% of the snaps, and he didn't even start in this game. We saw an I formation 2 tight end set to go for this game right off the bat, and honestly, didn't go so well in the run game, as Dalvin Cook had less than 2 yards per carry, which is terrible for Dalvin Cook. And I just want to mention here, Dalvin Cook, like I've said in this season, Dalvin Cook is one of those contracts that the Minnesota Vikings are going to have to look to do something about this offseason. I talked about earlier in this episode how the Minnesota Vikings are going to pay Justin Jefferson whatever he wants to get paid, and spoiler alert, Jefferson is going to be the highest paid receiver after this season. And as of right now, this Minnesota Vikings core that we have right now, we cannot keep. It's not going to be able to happen. We are giving far too much money to a few players in this Minnesota Vikings offense. The Vikings are going to have to do something about. All of our money is going to Brian O'Neill, Kirk Cousins, and Adam Thielen, and Dalvin Cook. This is not going to be the case going forward, as 2 or 3 of those names that I just mentioned will likely not be here after 2 seasons with the Minnesota Vikings. And like I mentioned, the passing offense for the Minnesota Vikings was on all game long. And you're going up against a very tough New England Patriots defense that honestly, I wouldn't have been surprised if the Patriots defense was able to hold us to 3 points the same way the Dallas Cowboys offense was, or defense was. Well, going into this game, it was safe to say the Vikings came into it with a completely different perspective than they went into the Dallas Cowboys offense, where they said, oh, okay, let's throw 5 receivers out there and let's get it to one of our receivers. Well, going into this game, that was obviously not the case, as the Minnesota Vikings had more attention on protecting Kirk Cousins than getting it to their receivers, pretty much. Well, into this game, it was great to see the Minnesota Vikings ball go to multiple different players. Obviously, the Patriots defense had their eyes on Justin Jefferson, and they did everything they could to try to stop him. Well, you saw multiple other players get into the mix. It was great to see Jalen Reagor get a 22-yard reception. It was great to see Johnny Munt's workload get upped in this game. You also saw multiple other players, Dalvin Cook into the receiving game. You saw KJ Osborne get a reception. It was great for the Minnesota Vikings offense as they ran in this game, but our offense was highlighted not just by Justin Jefferson, but our big 3 as a whole, who all got a receiving touchdown in this game. That being Justin Jefferson, who got 139 receiving yards and a touchdown. Shouldn't come by a surprise to any of us. I mean, like I've said before, you can contain Justin Jefferson. It can be done. We saw it against the Cowboys. We saw it against the Eagles. We saw it against the Lions. You can contain him. But when you do that, you are opening up a door for other players to have a great day, as Adam Thielen had a bounce-back day in this game. 9 receptions, 61 yards, and a receiving touchdown. Adam T. Thielen has returned in this game. TJ Hawkinson has stepped up as that third target for Kirk Cousins here in this game. 5 receptions, 43 yards, and a receiving touchdown. That is his first touchdown with the Minnesota Vikings in purple and gold. Great to see. I just realized TJ Hawkinson is not even going to have a bye week this year, as he was traded before the Detroit Lions bye week and after the Vikings bye week. Still, doesn't matter. TJ Hawkinson is a dog. TJ Hawkinson, it's so good to know that we just robbed our division rival here and took arguably their best target on offense. Yes, arguably better than Amon-Ra St. Brown, I will say it. But it's great to know TJ Hawkinson is now our slot receiver. He is not just our blocking tight end. He's not just the guy who's going to protect Kirk Cousins all game long and be able to be that extra target on the Minnesota Vikings. He's not just an extra target on the Minnesota Vikings. He is that X factor on the Minnesota Vikings, the guy that is going to continue to make an impact week in and week out for the Minnesota Vikings offense, as he pretty much stole KJ Osborne's position. Osborne was a dominant force on this Minnesota Vikings offense throughout the first few weeks of the season. He had that game-winning touchdown, a couple game-winning touchdowns in his career so far, and he's that X factor for the Minnesota Vikings, at least was, before TJ Hawkinson comes out here with his massive wingspan and just hauls in everything. Had a couple drop passes, which sucks to see, but even though, despite his drop passes, we can see that Kevin O'Connell still has his faith in TJ Hawkinson as he went to him, targeted him as a first read in a couple games, or a couple plays in this game. Okay, that aside, Minnesota Vikings offense, great day. We couldn't have asked for a better performance from the Minnesota Vikings offense, and special teams as well. Kene Iwangu, again. Kene Iwangu proving yet again why he might be the best kick returner in this league. Has the most kick return touchdowns by any player throughout the last 2 seasons. He got his 3rd kick return touchdown of his career, and he is just on his sophomore season in this league. I mean, Kene Iwangu is here to stay. This is going back to what I talked about with Dalvin Cook. Dalvin Cook will likely not be here for very long. I'm going to be honest. The Vikings, in my opinion, are looking to possibly move forward with Alexander Mattison. They had multiple trade offers for Mattison and did not take it. Why could that be? Alexander Madison's expected to be a free agent this year. Why would the Vikings not at least try to get something for Mattison when he's only getting 4 or 5 carries a game? It could possibly be due to just the fact that the Vikings want to move forward with Mattison and Kene Iwangu and possibly salvage Dalvin Cook just simply because you have to do whatever you can to possibly pay for Justin Jefferson's contract, because whatever you pay him, he is deserving of that money. Back to the Minnesota Vikings, Kene Iwangu, great day. 93-yard kick return touchdown, 97-yard, I believe it was actually one of the longest touchdowns of the entire NFL season so far. On to the defense. Defense for the Minnesota Vikings is now allowing the most passing yards in this league. Mac Jones threw 382 passing yards on your secondary. Minnesota Vikings, you have multiple future Hall of Famers, multiple All-Pros on your defense. Looking specifically at a few guys here, Patrick Peterson, Harrison Smith, Eric Kendricks. I mean, you could throw multiple names into the mix on top of this. Minnesota Vikings, doesn't matter, should not be allowing 382 passing yards to Mac Jones. And a lot of it is also due to the pass rushing game. Minnesota Vikings were not able to even get to Mac Jones until what felt like the fourth quarter of this game, where the Vikings were finally able to apply pressure on the quarterback. 409 yards allowed to the New England Patriots. Patriots had more yards of offense from the Minnesota Vikings. In my opinion, the Vikings offense looked better, but at the end of the day, Patriots offense was able to dominate more than our offense was, which was an interesting sight to see. I wouldn't be surprised going back onto the Minnesota Vikings offseason if the Vikings just scrap this defense as a whole. I mean, outside of Patrick Peterson, can you really say anybody has exceeded your expectations? Maybe Zadarius Smith. He has been quiet. He had a quiet couple games, had a sack in a few games. And as a matter of fact, hasn't been able to get to the quarterback in a few games for the Minnesota Vikings. Danielle Hunter. Okay. Danielle Hunter's been okay. Looking at it, the Minnesota Vikings, there are multiple names here who have been all pros with the Minnesota Vikings and have not been able to have a good season. Harrison Smith. I'm sorry. Harrison Smith has to be one of those players you have to look at possibly replacing. Or if you're not going to replace, you might already have his replacement in Lewis Cine. I don't know. We haven't been able to see him. Unfortunately, the guy suffered with a big injury. I don't know what the Vikings are going to do to try to fix this defense in the offseason, but I believe it starts with Ed Donato. I believe it starts with just getting a defensive coordinator who is not going to run the same soft zone defense that he's been running all season long. The Patriots knew exactly what they had to do. Just target the middle of the field. Just target Kendrick Bourne in the middle of the field all game long because he's going to be open, because the Vikings have this soft part of their defense that teams know that they can just continue to target all season long. It's an entirely different defense. Last year, the Vikings were getting beat deep in every game. Now we're just getting attacked in the middle of the field, moving the chains, moving the sticks, get beat on time of possession in just about every game due to this. I mean, the Minnesota Vikings defense as a whole is just god-awful. We are the worst secondary in the league. And the Vikings defense allowing more passing yards by any team should not be a complete surprise to us. I mean, we've seen some core injuries to this Minnesota Vikings defense in Cam Dantzler and a Caleb Evans, but still, most passing yards. You have multiple All-Pros, multiple Hall of Famers on your defense right now, and you are allowing this many passing yards to Mac Jones, a quarterback you weren't even able to pressure since about the fourth quarter of this game. It's great to know the Vikings came up with a victory, so then I don't have to completely highlight this Minnesota Vikings defense. But what I will say is the Vikings have to look to a new cornerback in the first round of this upcoming draft. It's going to be a great corner draft. I have excellent news. I've evaluated some of these corners, and in my opinion, this is a cornerback draft that you're going to love. Unlike the last couple of drafts where the Vikings were not able to get a corner where they were picking, it's great to know that this finally we can maybe get a lockdown corner where the Vikings will be drafting, which will likely be in the 20s. No, drafting at number 32. That's where we're going to be drafting. Okay, going out to the Minnesota Vikings player of the game. Got to give it once again to Justin Jefferson. Given it's Jefferson about every other week, it feels like 11 targets in this game, 9 receptions, 139 yards, and 11 passing yards with a touchdown to add to his monstrous day. Justin Jefferson, just a beast. Next week, the Minnesota Vikings will play the New York Jets at home, Sunday, 12 o'clock Central Time on CBS. I talked about how this Minnesota Vikings stretch went. I just have to say, Minnesota Vikings have done an excellent job. Throughout the last 3 weeks, I talked about how the Vikings have a tough 3-game stretch against the Buffalo Bills, where they went on the road and won, against the Dallas Cowboys at home, where they got destroyed, and then now against the Patriots, where they were able to win on the fourth quarter as well. Minnesota Vikings have been consistently coming up on the winning end of these close games, which is not exactly what you want to see. You'd rather see your team beat up on terrible teams. And I mean, the New York Jets game is likely going to be about the same story, where it's very close and you're hoping your team can beat up on the opponents, but we just haven't had that all season long. It's been close games where the Vikings were able to come up with victories, or just disgusting games where the Vikings got blown out. And the Vikings still, despite a 9-2 record where we have a massive lead over anyone else in the NFC North right now, Despite that, the Minnesota Vikings have a negative point differential, which sucks to see for the Vikings. I would love to see us be a team who can be feared. However, right now we are still a team who are being underestimated by a lot of NFL fan bases, and rightfully so, because we've been destroyed by two opponents that we're likely going to have to go on the road or at least play in the playoffs. And you don't want to play the Cowboys or Eagles in the playoffs. Well, you can play the Cowboys in playoffs. That's fine. Cowboys usually don't look good in the playoffs. Rather not that happen. I'd rather San Francisco 49ers have another Cinderella story and beat the Cowboys once again. But still, Minnesota Vikings, great win, 33-26. We have a massive win over anyone else in the NFC North. We've basically locked down our division for the Minnesota Vikings. Great news. Minnesota Vikings on the road, Jets next, or at home, Jets next week. Let me know what y'all think.